Hello, everyone. Welcome to Politico's Competitive Europe Summit. My name is Koen Verhelst. I'm a trade reporter with Politico. And today here, I'm delighted to be joined by Mario Monti, who you just already heard from. And we also have two more speakers for this panel. Please join me in welcoming Pedro Miguel da Costa e Silva, the ambassador of Brazil to the EU. Good afternoon. And Ambassador Saurav Kumar, ambassador of India to the European Union. So we are meeting each other at a time when the U.S. President Trump has quite changed the reality of geopolitics, both with the tariff policy and his foreign policy when it comes to Ukraine and China and a host of other relationships. So in that sort of tension-filled environment, what should we do, as Europe? China remains on the rise politically, even though maybe economically it might be shrinking a little bit here and there. And as of today, European leaders are meeting in Copenhagen to discuss the threat from Russia, which remains very real and might actually become realer by the day. So democratic nations around the world, two of them are joining me here on stage, are scrambling to salvage what they have left of, let's say, the economies that can work together with each other. So who are the economic allies and the key partnerships that Europe can actually rely on going forward while we are weathering this geopolitical turbulence? So we're diving into these critical questions, but before we do so, let me remind you, please join the conversation online, whether on X or LinkedIn or Blue Sky. Please join us on your social media channel of your choice. And let's dive in straight with the ambassador of Brazil, Pedro da Costa e Silva. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
We have heard just very recently this week that the EU and the four Mercosur countries will be signing their long-awaited trade deal, 25 years in the making, in early December in Brazil. Are you satisfied with this timeline? Does it work for Brazil?
Well, that is the timeline that my president would like to achieve, to have this agreement signed in December during our presidency and the Mercosur summit. The ball is in the court of our European friends, and we're hoping that they will be able to be there and sign the agreement by that date.
You sound a bit skeptical.
I have learned, dealing with the EU-Mercosur agreement, that you need to follow the maxim, seeing is believing.
We were actually on a similar panel last year, exactly a year ago at the previous Competitiveness Summit. And also back then you were very careful in not making any promises, so to speak. And even though the negotiations have been concluded and maybe France is releasing its opposition, you're still very careful.
I have to be, but I'm working very hard to make sure that we have the breakthrough.
That brings me to Senator Monti. Thank you for joining us online, Mr. Monti. I wanted to bring up a story you wrote for Politico for an opinion piece where you said the time of divide and conquer has kind of gone, and at the moment, especially when we looked at Russian ruler Vladimir Putin going to Alaska to meet Trump, that you said, well, look, we are now in an age of unite to humiliate. Is that really the way how Europe should look at it at the moment? You would say?
Sorry, I missed your quoting my sentence. What did I say?
You wrote that the autocrats of the world, for instance, Russian President Putin, yes, that they unite to humiliate Europe and other democratic nations around the world.
Yes. I'm afraid this is going on by the day. But of course, humiliation exists only if those on which pressures for them to humiliate are exercised give up. I believe that in the case of the US, we Europeans should stubbornly continue to consider the American people and also the US as a state, as a federal state, friends. We almost all the institutions we have in place are there in Europe because they were originally launched and promoted also in Europe by the US. Just think of our independent central bank, the ECB, and exactly the competition authorities like the Commission. Occupying Germany after World War II, it was the American administration which wanted to avoid the repetition of what had happened. So no hyperinflation fueling the power of Hitler, hence an independent central bank like the Fed, which is still somewhat independent. And they didn't want the reconstitution of the big industrial trusts for the war industries, hence the competition authority. So I think we cannot be blamed for taking care of the important legacy that comes largely from the US. So no humiliation. We should stand on our feet without provocations, and whatever we might do, and I think we should do, and I'm pleased that we have the distinguished ambassadors from Brazil and India in terms of alliances with the rest of the world, also to manage the provision of global public goods, in my view, should done continuously with an open spirit to the US. They maybe are not there for the time being in this cooperation, but we do what they taught us to do.
Yeah, the United States, of course, remains incredibly relevant geopolitically and also for trade. You know, the EU has no larger trade relationship than with the United States. That brings me actually to India, because India is negotiating both a deal with the Trump administration, but also a very long worked deal with the European Union. Ambassador Kumar, the first question I want to put to you is, how do you see that triangle sort of working? Is there a scenario in which India needs to wait in order to get first a deal with Trump before it can agree to a deal with the EU?
No, I don't think there is any sequencing as far as our discussions are with the US and EU are concerned. When President von der Leyen and the College of Commissioners had visited India in February, and following the discussions with Prime Minister, the directive was to complete the negotiations on India-EU FTA by the end of the year. So as far as the EU is concerned, that's the timeline we have. Both the Trade Commissioner and my minister are very conscious of that, and we are working towards that deadline. US, of course, is another story. I think our expectation was to complete the negotiations with the US, our trade negotiations with them earlier, but that didn't happen. But the good part is that the discussions have started again.
So when it comes to the EU-India negotiations, there is a lot of contact this year. The Trade Commissioner, Maroš Šefčovič, has been to India 3 times. He was also there very recently, I think last month. Yeah. After he came back, the Commission launched a strategic agenda, which confusingly was called a joint agenda. So initially a lot of people thought that it was joint between India and the EU, but it was internally joint. When he talked about this agenda, he actually referred to his trip to India, and he said, I must admit, however, that I had hoped for more progress on the trade negotiations. So what kind of breakthrough do you think the EU and India need in order to get actually to that deadline in the next 3 months?
No, so just let me touch upon the joint communication for a minute. You see, it goes back to President von der Leyen's speech in the Parliament when she was elected, and she had spoken of a new strategic agenda for India. And I think the contours of that became clearer in the leader's statement following her visit to India, and this joint communication, which really is a kind of joint between the different EU institutions, is a very comprehensive, forward-looking, positive document which would raise our relationship to a higher level. We have a summit planned, so I think while presently it is joint between EU institutions, the summit document would make it joint between EU and India. Now, coming back to your question, it's true that both sides had expected more movement to take place in the last round. That didn't happen. But I suppose that's the nature of trade negotiations. I mean, I'm not a trade negotiator, but I'm getting experience of it. But I would not look upon it as an impediment or a great negative. I think considerable progress was made during the negotiations. I was there. What didn't happen was, clinching different issues which they wanted to do. But the good part is that you mentioned about the Trade Commissioner being in India thrice. Our minister has been here, I think, at least 3 times, if not 4. He would be coming here again. Our negotiating team with the chief negotiator would be here on the weekend to engage. We have been having monthly rounds, but from now on, it would be a continuous discussion because end of December is not too far away.
Yeah, so Minister Piyush Goyal, the Minister of Commerce in India, Minister of Commerce and Industry of India, he's coming later this month, right?
Yeah,
to Brussels.
He's coming this month. He would have come earlier, but they are discussing the dates because both of them are busy people. So it's likely to happen in the latter half of this month. That's what they're looking at.
And as far as I understand, Commissioner Šefčovič and Minister Goyal, they have quite a good connection to sort of try to drive this to the end.
Well, I have
line.
experienced it firsthand, and what you say is very true.
When you talked to earlier about perhaps the progress that you were hoping for that didn't materialize, which kind of sectors or areas of the negotiation were slacking a bit?
Yeah, this is the other thing which happens in trade negotiations. People tend to reduce it to 1 or 2 issues. I think we have 24 chapters there, and around 12 or 13 of them have been completed. There is agreement. So on the remaining, we are at different stages, very advanced in some, where 1 or 2 things remain. In certain chapters, a lot of work needs to be done.
Are you still confident that it can be done before the end of the year?
Of course.
Okay.
Very confident.
That brings me back to the Mercosur negotiations, which have often focused on, since it being a very broad agreement across 700 million people, there has actually been one sector that really stood out for opposition and for criticism that has also been very loud. I don't know, what's your reflection on this now that the deal has actually been concluded and soon to be signed?
Well, I think that it is unfortunate that the focus is only on the issue of agriculture. First, because there is a lot of disinformation and fake news about this. A lot of what is said is simply not true. And it focuses the debate on, of course, agriculture is important for the EU and agriculture is important for the Mercosur member states, but we have negotiated a partnership agreement that is not only about trade and the economy, even though that's a very important part, but about the political part, science and technology, human rights, sustainable development. There are so many issues. The difficult thing is to find something that is not in there in this agreement. So the fact that all the discussion is focused on one issue and that the discussion itself on this issue is based on disinformation, lack of knowledge, and I can understand that there is a political agenda, domestic political agenda, but the discussion is simply not based on facts.
Do you have an example of
I
one
could
of these
stay
things?
here the whole day, but all these things that the products are not safe, that our products do not comply with the standards, that they are lower standards, that they pose a health hazard, or that they nothing of that, nothing. Not one thing is true. And then things are said that the beef is with hormones. No hormones in the beef. And you keep on hearing this narrative. For example, it's not safe and that you have animal diseases. If you look at the numbers, you discover that you have much more animal diseases in Europe than you have in the EU. I can give you one example. Avian fever. There has been this year the first case in history in Brazil. You have hundreds per year in the EU, but nobody talks about this. So what I would like is, now that we are at crunch time with the EU-Mercosur agreement, that people start discussing this agreement based on facts, on the fact that it will be positive for the EU agriculture. There are big concessions that we made to the agriculture, and there are no risks for EU agricultural sector, nor to the EU society. And then we talk about services, government procurement, intellectual property rights, goods, and the fact that this agreement is an agreement that is based on the WTO rules, that it's based on trust, on predictability, on what we can do together. It's the next step for our relations as countries with the EU. And recall that Mercosur was built in the image of the EU, so not having this agreement it's really mind-boggling that it's so hard to talk about it and talk about it in a rational way.
Is it because that the EU and Mercosur actually agree on everything but agriculture? That the agriculture became such a sticking point?
No, certainly not, because this was a very complicated negotiation, as the ambassador said, in which we had to make concessions one side to the other. There were very delicate and sensitive issues for Mercosur in which we had to make concessions, even in agriculture, wine, spirits, geographical indications. And there were other sectors in which we made very significant concessions. And of course, we had to ask things from the EU also, but this is the nature of a negotiation, and like the ambassador of India said, you can't really boil down the negotiation to one issue. Here, another fake news is the European agriculture paid for agreement. Of course not. Especially because the quotas that we received in the so-called sensitive products are small quotas. So you see, if you go beyond the, the supposed headlines, you can, and you really dive into what the agreement is and means, you discover that it's it has a lot of potential for the relations, and it should be discussed as such. So I am a bit sometimes frustrated and tired of always just listening to the same thing, but people not really talking to me. They are talking at me, so that's what I would like to have changed.
Well, that's why we have you here today. If I may add a little reflection, I think what we've seen over the last 8-9 months since Donald Trump returned to the White House, I think, is that trade has become much more of a talk about goods when it's actually much more broader. And I think the reason why we have you two here on stage, and also Senator Monti present, is that trade is a bit of a thermometer for geopolitics, and in the end it's about association agreements, not just about sending a container this way or that way. Which brings me back to you, Senator. How do you see the discussions with these two countries? How do you think they further the EU's agenda of diversification, not only with trade, but also when it comes to a broader geopolitical effort?
Yeah, I was impressed and very much encouraged by the conversation of the two ambassadors with you, because this is tough work, but full of progress, very sensitive, with achievements and hope. And I was making a reflection. We are talking trade now, and we also had a reference to competition policy earlier. Now, these are two of the three only fields where the EU has executive powers for the whole of the Union. In the area of trade, Then, of course, there is the European Parliament in the area of competition and in the area of money with the ECB. And we see in these areas that the EU is indeed a credible player. It is respected. Occasionally, when it has the power of sanction, it might also be feared by companies. And what an abyssal difference it makes with the areas where the EU does not have these powers, because member states so far did want to keep close to their chest the instrument. We cannot complain if we have so great difficulties vis-à-vis the US now, in the absence of a common foreign policy for the EU, and in the idyllic neglect for many years of the fact that while we discussed day and night about member states living above or not living above their means, the Stability and Growth Pact, etc., the EU as a whole was living above its means because it did not account for the cost of its defense. Now, I hope that one of the consequences of the Trump storm will be to accelerate these processes of political realization in the national capitals and in the public opinion that we have to bring all other policy areas, first and foremost foreign policy and defense policy, a bit closer to what we have now for trade, competition, and money. And we know that also these areas where now Europe plays for the whole of the Union were very difficult. Some of us are old enough to remember how much central bank governors and foreign and finance ministers were attached to national sovereignty. When they discovered that crisis after crisis, only one of the member states, Germany, had in fact monetary sovereignty, and all the others had to run weekly because they had just a few minutes to adjust their interest rates when at 2 p.m. the spokesperson on Thursdays, the spokesperson of the German Bundesbank announced their rate, then they decided, well, after all, it's better to exercise a small portion of real sovereignty around the table in Frankfurt rather than pretending to exercise exclusively a sovereignty that was no longer there.
That brings me to perhaps another topic where plenty of member states have indeed national sovereignty, national competence to stay in Brussels speak, defense. In the strategic agenda that the Commission revealed, Ambassador Kumar, there was also an exploration of defense cooperation with India. How do you look at this when it comes from an EU initiative, but it's actually mostly a member state authority?
Yeah, so primarily, the focus is on defense industries, and when the College of Commissioners and President von der Leyen were in Delhi, I think this subject was also touched upon in the conversation with the Prime Minister. There is a lot of interest in the Indian industry to collaborate with Europe in this particular area, because I think they realize that a lot of developments are taking place in Europe in terms of reviving your defense industry and building up your defense industry. Commissioner for Defense and Space, when he was in India, had a meeting with our Society of Defense Manufacturers, and they will be coming to Brussels, I think, in November. And I think security and defense partnership is something which is also being talked about. So I think that we'll be very happy to engage with Europe on that also.
Does that also get translated to a political level? Because of course, there has been some criticism from the Commission on the fact that India sent 65 troops to the Zapat exercise in Russia. That is, of course, very different from an industrial connection, but that's also very much part of the agenda that the Commission revealed.
You had your NATO allies which were part of Zapat. And my personal thing there is that had it not been for the drone incursions at that point of time, which happened almost at the same time, nobody would have even thought about Zapat or bothered about it.
Fair enough. That brings me to you, Ambassador. When it comes to the Mercosur deal, this is, of course, much more broad, as you already touched upon. Is there also a defense component, perhaps, in today's insecure world?
No, I was listening to the conversation we just had, but this is bilateral. Brazil, EU, the first political and defense talks held in Brazil. And of course, also we have Brazilian industries present in Europe in the defense sector, like Embraer. So we engage and talk with all partners. The Mercosur agreement doesn't go into that area, but bilaterally we have contacts on that with the EU.
And there's another factor that is very important on Brazil's agenda this year, the COP30 summit coming up in Belém, if I'm not mistaken, right? This is another chance for Brazil to show its sort of, let's say, diplomatic prowess on the international stage. What's your expectation for the summit over there?
Well, first of all, I think that we are counting on the EU and EU member states and all other stakeholders to be there and to help us through leadership, lead through example. This is going to be a very different COP because it's a COP not of the forest, but in the forest. And we have a series of initiatives, not just implemented what we have negotiated in terms of the climate agreements, but we're putting, for example, on the table a facility for keeping the forest standing, the tropical forest. We are working, including with the EU, on this idea of trying to harmonize a bit carbon markets to make sure that the rules, regulations, and recognitions, they make sense between us. And we're also going to present something on energy transition. So I think there's going to be a lot of issues of interest for the EU and for the relations between EU and Brazil. But all other countries are fundamental to make this COP a success.
That actually brings me maybe to the final question for you both, because the Second von der Leyen Commission has gotten a bit of criticism on let's say, losing sight of the Green Deal. There's been recently an announcement with a trade deal with Indonesia, a conclusion of those talks, where the sustainability chapter has been perhaps not as ambitious as in previous cases. Both of your countries are also interested in this matter quite strongly, especially as it relates to trade. Do you see this as well, that like the current ambition on Brussels is a bit lower than before?
I won't comment on that, but what I can say is that there is a lot of space for us to work with the EU. We have not only a dialogue on sustainability with them, on clean energy, but we have the regional forum this year. Now we're having also in November the CELAC summit with the EU, and multilaterally we can work on all the issues that related to climate change, to biodiversity, to all the issues that deal with sustainable development. So that's, I think, my focus, and should be our focus on what we can do together. The internal domestic part of the EU, I will leave to Europeans.
Ambassador Kumar, a final question for you. India has said that it might retaliate against the carbon border adjustment mechanism that the EU has in place, which will start working from next year. Do you think that that's an extra sort of obstacle in the trade negotiations? Is it in each other's way, or?
I mean, let me put it this way. CBAM definitely is an important item which is being discussed between the two sides. Number of ideas have been put on the table, and let's see what comes out of it.
Well, I guess that's a good place to end it. You know, basically I think what we can all conclude is that we basically should keep talking to each other, whether it's here on panels like these or you know, among each other as we did before we got on stage, or between EU member states. I want to thank all our panelists, Senator Monti from Italy, Ambassador Pedro Miguel Costa da Silva, and Ambassador Saurabh Kumar. Thank you all very much. Please remain seated. We have another panel coming up with my colleague Peter Haak, and I invite you to enjoy the rest of your day at Politico's Competitiveness Summit. Thank you very much.